Hi, I'm Gareth, the tech support representative here at Atlantic British. Here's the timing chain kit that we used on the 2011 Range Rover Sport 5.0 engine, non-supercharged. Everything on the table you see here is what we use and is the basic necessity to do the job with. This timing chain kit fits all 5.0 and 3.0 V8, V6 engines from 2010 onwards, and some other components also included, which are part of the service procedure to do the job. Okay, completing this job is a major strip down job of the front of the engine. A number of the components on the front of the engine have to be removed. My recommendation is to replace a lot of these components because you've got to take them off anyway. They're pretty much all wear items and serviceable components, from things like water pumps to thermostats, etc. Completing this job of replacing the timing chain is a full strip down job of the front of the engine. Removal of the radiator, the AC condenser and other larger components at the front to give you access to the front of the engine. A lot of the components on the table here are not part of the kit. The main part of the kit is the timing chains, shoes, guides, right here in the center section of the table. A few of the other components are serviceable components that I decided are good replacements while you're doing the job. They're all wear components. Other components, more serious, that are wear out and have issues are the VVTs here and here, exhaust and intake. The other tools are necessity components that you absolutely have to use to remove parts or tighten or secure components on the engine while doing the work. So saying before, these are some of the basic tools you absolutely have to do the job with. This tool is for holding the front dampener, the crankshaft dampener, and removing the crank pulley bolt. These go together as part of a kit. It's a 24mm socket. It's actually a 3/4 drive, so be prepared for that. So that's for holding the crank pulley bolt. This tool kit, part of the kit, is for removing the damper on the front of the engine, the front pulley effectively. This is the timing tool kit, which holds the cam locks, the camshaft turning tool, the crankshaft flywheel locking tool, and another locking tool for the flywheel. Over here we have the slide hammer for removing the fuel injectors, a very needed tool. You're not going to get the injectors out without this. This tool is the fuel injector seal calibration tool and the installer tool for sizing and installing the nylon seals here that hold the injectors, well, the seals are on the injector and the clip that holds the injector into place. Okay, so let's talk difficulty level now on this install kit and using the tools. It's not for the faint-hearted. It is definitely not a DIYer's job at home in his garage. This job should only really be covered and carried out by a professional auto technician, either an independent shop or a well-versed shop that are prepared to get involved in a job like this. Today we're going to do a replacement timing chain kit on this 2011 Range Rover Sport, non-supercharged. The timing chain kit is a TCK 5030. We're going to start off with the basics of taking off the engine covers, the radiator shroud, the radiator fan, all the air intake pipes. First we're going to start with taking off the engine harmonic cover. Basic, just a nice quick tug to pull it off the base stops and slide out, which removes the cover. Next we're going to remove the air intakes here and left and right, so we can access the front to remove the cooling system shroud from the fan and the radiator. Somebody's already been in here. remove the pipes, the intake pipes, put them on the side. A gentle tug takes it off the airbox with a wiggle off of the main intake. Then we're going to loosen the hose clamp that holds the main air intake from the intake plenum. Removal of the main engine breather here, from removal of the clamp that holds it onto the intake plenum, and the breather pipe here by squeezing the two sides and pulling firmly to remove it off the front. Then a small wiggle should pull the whole assembly out, giving full access to the front. Next is removal of the top fan shroud so we can access the fan for removal. There is a clip on both sides tucked underneath here. A tilt to the side, freeze it, and on this side, on the driver's side, a press to the side again should free this one there. And then being careful, holding the pipe away, we should be able to pull the shroud clean out of the car, giving us full access to the fan. Next we want to disconnect the fan electrical connector. Gentle tug right out, it slides right out on these slots. A press on the clip and a firm tug pulls the connector apart. Next is to loosen off the main nut that holds the fan to the front of the engine. So once the fan has been loosened, it can be spun off. Non-supercharged cars have a right-hand thread to loosen. Supercharged cars, left-hand thread to loosen. This is non-supercharged, so we're doing it, unloosening it the clockwise direction, which would normally be tightening. So once it's loose and off, it's just nice, gentle pull out from the radiator shroud, which of course then gives us more access to everything we need to get to at the front of the engine. Next job is to remove the two belts from the front of the engine. The first belt is driving the viscous fan pulley from the crankshaft. The second one is the primary belt, which drives all the ancillaries, which has the tensioner here, which we'll put a tool in here to remove. This one we'll undo the 3 bolts and then remove the pulley off, bringing the belt with it. So to remove this pulley, I undid the 3 bolts and gave it a gentle tap with a copper hammer right on the edge to shock it loose, and that will bring the pulley off of the hub, and that will give us the room to remove the belt and the pulley in one. Next job is to remove the tension off the main tensioner from the primary belt by putting a ratchet or a breaker bar into this slot here. Relieve the tension off of the belt, take the belt off of the top pulley here, relieve the tension back off of the tensioner. Then we're going to remove this main assembly here, this bracket, as it's got a roller behind it attached to it, which holds the primary belt on also. So the tensioner is quite tight. We're going to need a good bit of leverage and a nice good strong pull to remove the tension. And then to remove the belt, I'm going to try and pull it off of the top pulley and let the tension go all the way back. So the belt is actually loose but trapped behind the pulleys. Next job is to remove this bracket here, which is the support bearing area for the viscous fan unit. Now we can remove the bracket with the pulley on it that also rolls the belt around. Next, I'm going to remove the tensioner bolt here and pull the tensioner off, so it should give us more clear access to remove the whole belt from the front of the engine. One main bolt gets the whole tensioner off and gives us full access to remove the belt at this point. There we have it, the belt is now free and can be removed from the front of the car. As we're doing this job, which is going to be timing chain replacement and the guides and timing chain tensioners and shoes, I've also noticed that the vehicle has a little bit of a coolant leak. We can see the coolant down here, and it appears to be coming from the manifold area where the water pump mounts to the front of the engine. So while we're in there, we're going to replace the water pump at the same time. The next job in the procedure is to drain some coolant out so we can remove the radiator top hose, the thermostat assembly and the lower hose, so we can gain access to the right side cover that covers the timing gears. So to remove the thermostat, we have to access the retaining screw down on the side of the cylinder head. To do that, I'm going to pull out the air box. Will give me a straighter, more direct access. Removal of the push plug that holds the wiring harness to the air box, and then a quick squeeze of the connector pulls the connector clean off and tuck it out the way over there. A gentle tug gets the air box out. Quick slide to get the reservoir off the main air box and pull the air box clean out of the way. So that has now given me clear visibility and access to the retaining screw right there to undo, so we can free off the thermostat assembly. I'm going to undo the clamp here, here and here, and then remove the thermostat from the vehicle, so I can then get access to the main timing cover at the front of the engine. So after removing the screw, it's left the thermostat free and loose. I'm going to pull the thermostat off the main water pipe manifold at the top here and off of the water pump housing. I'm going to disconnect this quick connector so we can pull the whole assembly out, and gives us more access and room. So for removal of the thermostat assembly, normally we'd be pulling this clip and pulling it clean out of the slot of the lower section of the hose. However, it seemed a little bit tight and seized and I didn't want to damage it. So I actually undid the main clamp off the lower radiator hose and the bypass hose here, so I could access it a little easier and pull it out as an assembly and separate it afterwards. At this point, we're making a conscious decision to replace the thermostat assembly as a service component. We already know that the water pump's leaking. It would be good practice to replace the thermostat also at this time. So I've removed this little bypass hose from the water pump, so not to break it. I'm going to undo the smaller hose here. I'm going to take it off at the top of the reservoir and the radiator, so it gives us good clear room, nothing gets broken and everything stays intact. So I've removed the pipes from the fittings on the engine, on the reservoir and on the radiator. We'll pop it to one side so it doesn't get damaged and we can reinstall it afterwards. I'm going to remove this other hose here from the water pump area, which will open up a lot more. And then we're going to start undoing the electrical connectors from the front of the engine so we can access all the timing covers properly. Then we're going to start and access the crank pulley and remove the front crank pulley from the front of the engine, and probably the water pump as well. So we removed the serpentine belts from the engine, the tensioner. We removed the power steering pump pulley off of the power steering pump. These can be a little bit tight. There gets to be rust corrosion build-up on the edge of the flange here. I took it off. I soaked it in PB Blaster overnight and scraped away a lot of the loose rust and then pried it off. It did come off quite clearly and easily. The next job was to remove the timing covers from the front of the engine to inspect and test the timing variators to see if they turn smoothly or not. This one I took off already, as you can see. They literally have several screws that hold them on, and then a gentle pry against the tang here and here will pull it off, and it will literally pop right off. Same on the other side. I took the screws off of this side already. This is just a little bit of a wiggle to pull off and take out. Those will be refitted with fresh new sealant on them. The next job we've established is we are actually going to replace the timing gear variators here, and over on the passenger side, here and here. However, to do that job, we need to remove the valve covers, which includes, of course, removing the fuel injectors, spark plugs and coils. So I'm going to spend some time on removing the valve covers, injectors, and we'll be taking more video of that at the time when I get further into that part of the job. It's just sound deadening. Okay, we're going to remove the breather pipe, what looks like the purge line, disconnect it here. I'm going to undo the wiring harness for the ignition coils, and then gain access to the injector rail. Fuel ignition coils off next. Here and here. A little bit of a tight fit here and here, but these two are quite straightforward and easy. Injector rail out. Unfortunately the injectors have stuck in and we've got to pull them out. There is a special tool for that job, a slide hammer tool for the injector removal out of the cylinder heads. And of course, after removing them from the cylinder heads, when they're reinstalled, they have to be put back in with new Teflon rings and seals and clips. These are the injectors that the 5.0 litre engine uses. It's a direct injection. They seat directly into the center of the cylinder head, and they have to be removed with a slide hammer. This is the slide hammer here. There are two collets at the end of the slide hammer that go over the injector, somewhat like this. Hard to set up a little bit. Collar goes down. That's in the cylinder head, and then some good long swipes to try and pull it out of the cylinder head. They are in there pretty tight because of carbon buildup on the end of the injector and the Teflon rings. I've also soaked the injectors down with a little PB blaster. You can use WD-40. It does help loosen up and soften up any carbon that might be down there. And I've got 2 more to take out on this side. I've already removed the 2 front ones, which were easier to access. So that's the next step. There we go. Very dirty. But as you can see, they're extremely tight in there and need quite a bit of work to pull out. There we go. The last one. Appears to be a bit cleaner, but still needs cleaning. Alright, the next part of the job is to undo the bolts, 10mm headed ones that go around the valve cover, and on the inside section remove those and then pull off this side valve cover. We're going to do exactly the same procedure for the right hand side, left hand depending on how you're looking at the vehicle. Taking injectors out, coils out, and then the valve cover. There we go. Valve cover out. Looks easy enough, but in there tight. Okay, so now we have the valve cover off the left hand side, driver's side. We have had full access to the cams, so we can lock the cam if we need to with the new cam locks in the specialty tools. We have full access to the timing chain and the variators that we're going to be replacing. We're going to time it up, lock everything up, pull the timing chains off, but first I will be starting on the other side valve cover. Again, that's the same removal process, little time consuming, but same process. Pull everything out, coils, injectors, injector rail, valve cover off. So next step is to remove the radiator and the AC condenser so we can gain good access and vision to the front of the motor, the lower section when we get the front pulley off, and for when we time up and put on the new variators and timing chain. So with the radiator and condenser removed, the next step is what I would like to do is remove the front pulley from the crankshaft and then remove the lower timing cover. Their cams are timed up in the safe position. There is a couple of timing marks to note on the front. There's a little notch right here on the variator. But most importantly, at the back of the cylinder head on the cams, I don't know whether we can get this in, but the slots are normally horizontal, and you can perhaps just make out a little painted square section at the lower edge of the camshaft. That is to be at the bottom. This is all, of course, in the workshop manual as well. This one's a little bit fainter, but you can see just at the bottom of the cam a little couple of numbers and a little painted yellow square box. They go to the lower edge when timing it up. It's the same on all 4 cams. So the cams are timed up in the safe position to remove the chains. The next job is I'm going to send the car up, put the crank lock into position so I can break free the front crank pulley and do pulley removal. So here we are under the vehicle. I'm going to lock up the crankshaft with the timing plug tool, which goes in where the crank sensor goes, here on the left side of the engine, driver's side. You take the crank sensor out and put in the timing tool. It's already in there located. It can be a bit fussy to get into the right place, a little bit of wiggling of the crank backwards and forwards, but it does go in nice and firmly. The next thing is I'm going to remove the starter motor out of the engine, and I'm going to install this lock tool into the flywheel, which holds everything nice and tight. So when we put on all the pressure on the front crank pulley bolt, we can actually remove it without turning any of the crank and messing up any of the timing. So that's the next step. I'm going to start pulling the starter motor out so I can pop this in its place and hold the flywheel solid. So I locked the crank up with the locating pin into the reluctor ring. I also put in the special tool that comes in the kit that we sell. That goes in where the starter motor goes, and it locks into the tooth flywheel. You have to find a couple of new pieces of hardware, some new nuts and bolts to through bolt it into place and make sure it is locked in between the teeth. When I put it in initially, I noticed that I hadn't locked it in between the teeth after I used a mirror to inspect. Had to realign it. There is a bit of free play in the plate and the locking pin that goes into the teeth, so you do have to make sure you get it between the teeth and not next to the teeth. It's all locked up. The cams can't turn, the engine can't turn. I've put on the special tool on the front pulley. You do have to use a jack stand to lock the actual arm of the holding tool. I've actually used a piece of 2x4 underneath there as well because I don't have enough room or length on the actual jack stand to hold the locking tool, the holding tool in place. Now the engine can't turn or anything. There's a special socket that goes in to hold and undo the bolt. It's actually a 3/4 drive. I actually bought an adapter, a 3/4 to 1/2 inch, and you will definitely need a nice long breaker bar to actually break the bolt loose. It's extremely tight. I actually broke it loose a few minutes ago, but it goes in nicely, locks on the bolt. Like I say, I broke it loose a short while ago, and it's probably going to take 2 good strong pulls to break it loose. This is a left-hand thread to loosen. It's worth looking into. If it has like a 12.2 marker on it, it's a left-hand thread. If it's a 10.6, it's a right thread to undo. But definitely worth checking and taking the time to clean the head of the bolt and inspect with a mirror to see which thread it is. So now I'm going to undo the holding tool and take it off the pulley and assemble the tool that actually pulls the pulley off and the hub assembly from the crankshaft. It's got a flanged washer on it. That's why it won't come out any further. Here's the bolt. You can see clearly it's a left-handed thread bolt. And on the end it says 12, which denotes left-hand thread. And if I recollect from the workshop manual, if it's got a 10, it's a right-hand thread to undo. So now that's out, I can take out the other 4 bolts and screw in the adapter for the puller, so we can actually take off the hub assembly with the pulleys on it. So the 4 bolts that left holding the pulleys to the hub assembly are actually Loctited on. You can see the 3 I've already taken out. There's blue Loctite on them. They're exceptionally tight. So when you do come to take them off, because they're a Torx head, they're actually a T50. I'm making sure that when I put them on, put the tool on, I'm tapping it in with a copper hammer. First of all, to make sure it's home, and a bit of a shock to hopefully help break the seal. of the blue Loctite. And right now I'm using a 3/8 drive extended ratchet. They do come loose, but it takes a bit of work. So the next procedure is to move the crankshaft pulley dampener assembly. It's only really possible with the actual factory tool. I have heard of people using an aftermarket tool, but you have to be careful not to damage the threads inside the crankshaft. These have a left-hand thread, so we actually went out and purchased the tool specific for the job. We will be carrying the kit in the future, which will have the hub, the bearing and the bar that screws into the crankshaft with the left-hand thread. I have it assembled right now. There are two different length bolts, one for removal of the pulley and one for reinstallation. So there will be two sets of bolts. The kit will also comprise of the holding tool, which is a separate item from the removal tool of the pulley. This literally just holds the pulley and the engine still while you undo the crankshaft bolt. Okay, so here we have the crankshaft dampener assembly, puller and an installer. It does both. There are people I have heard who've bought aftermarket generic pullers, say they can get them off with that. However, this just eliminates any possibility of any damage happening to the pulley or to the engine or the crankshaft. The kit comprises of the main shaft assembly, which is all separated in the kit, bear in mind. It comes, one end is a left-hand thread that goes into the crankshaft, and the other is the threaded bar the actual puller installer sits on. As you can see, there's two bearing assemblies, two different sizes, one for each side. To remove the pulley from the crankshaft, the shaft is screwed in first into the crank. Then you install the hub assembly, the bearing assembly, which goes, I always put the bearing in first, it goes into the damper and recesses all the way as far in as you can get it. Then the other bearing goes on, and for removal, the hub goes this way around over the top and is screwed in to the hub with 4 bolts in all 4 corners, screwed down tight, and then hold the main center shaft with one wrench and undo with the other one. That pulls the whole assembly off. To reinstall, the bearings come out. To reinstall, the hub is actually screwed directly to the front flange of the damper, and a second set of bolts, which are shorter, screwed in all the way down. The bearing seats and screwed in, and then the shaft screwed into the crank and then screwed the opposite way to push it back onto the crank until it's fully home. So with the pulley assembly, the extractor assembly installed, hold the bar with one wrench and undo with the other. You may see it slowly pulling off. A little bit time consuming, but the right way to do the job. It is on quite tight, I can feel it. It is coming away. Okay, so the pulley is now loose on the shaft, the main shaft that screws into the crank. I will probably try and unscrew the whole assembly so we can take it off in one piece. Bearing in mind it's a left-hand thread to undo, and it's quite a long threaded bar, so and there we have the whole assembly off. It is a tight fit on the crankshaft. I've heard of them being extremely tight. I believe this one probably came off quite easily. And then the next job is to remove the front timing cover from the engine to gain full access to the lower timing area. Now we have it, front cover off, pretty straightforward. May want to suggest an oil crank seal replacement. This one looks to be distorted. It's flat around the bottom edge here and up on the top. It probably is just the outer dust seal. However, I don't want to take any risks and having to go back in there, so it'll probably get replaced. I already test fitted the cam lock tool to this side that we've got to take the chains off of, and the variators and the guides. I did the other side, the passenger side, already. The cam tool's locked in, holding the cams in time. The variators are off. One thing I did note is that the screws in the intake camshaft were very sludgy and dirty, so I'm going to make sure I clean everything out nice and clean. The guides are off, the chains are off, the tensioner's off. I'm going to follow that same procedure for this side here. This side seemed to be locked in place pretty well. This is the cam lock tool, the exhaust side, the intake side. The timing's spot on, and this should actually locate in the slots at the back of the camshaft. So the cam is back in and locked. The cams are locked in the timed position. The cam lock tool at the back there can be a little awkward and fiddly to fiddle around with because of the bulkhead firewall here. You have to get the twist wing nut close to be lined up so it's nice and locked in there. Next job is I'm going to loosen off the variator screws and pull the variators off, place them out of the way. They are getting replaced, so we will just, like I say, put them to one side with a new chain, guides and tensioner. Tensioner is off. This is the old style. It's going to get the new style put on. There's one variator off. Two. Now removal of the chain. And that's it. The chains, tensioners, guides off. We're now ready to clean up a little bit and start putting the new variators back on, the chains back in, the guides, etc. And try and get this thing back together solid. So here we are. I've built up the driver's side of the timing chains, bolted in first the first static chain guide, the plastic nylon one. Then I put in and bolted in the metal one that has the tensioner running against it, which is right here. The pin is still in it. We don't remove the pin until we're ready to set the timing. As you can see, the exhaust variator has a little notch at the top here, where the timing chain, the mark on the timing chain has to align with. The intake has a mark notch on the back side of it here, where the paint mark on the chain is meant to align with. There should be a little bit of free play in each variator. There's a fraction less in this one. So when we actually preload the variators and pull the pin on the timing chain tensioner, the chain tension is set properly. Also in the kit comes a new oil feed tube pipe here. I already replaced that, but you have to do it beforehand. As you can see, it feeds the back gear drive. I put on new thrust washers on the crankshaft gear, front and rear. And I'm going to build up this side, on the left side, on the passenger side. I already checked the timing on the balance shaft, which is correct. So we have both sides built up now. The timing variators are on the left side, on the passenger side. The timing marks being here. I don't know whether we can get that one in there. Right here, below, there's a yellow mark on the chain which lines up. And again, another marker down here, which lines up with another marker on the guide, on the plastic guide, right here. Now, timing up the engine, you do have to make sure that the chain actually locates on the crank gear. I noticed when I was putting the variators on, it had slipped off, and it seems like it's very easy for it to slip off without noticing. And of course, after that, I had to take the variators off again, relocate it, retime it. Then I put on the tensioner. It tells you to apply a pressure to the back of the chain guide and then pull the pin. And when you pull the pin, you do hear a positive loud click of the actual piston coming out, extending and hitting the guide, and the tension going on the chain. Same on both sides, of course, right and left. After that procedure, we use this tool here to tension the variators. Bit of a strange shape, however. Driver's side, you take the screw out of the oil suction tube and pull it forward slightly. You roll the tool in behind the gear. You locate the pin into the timing gear teeth, which locks it into place. Then we have a torque wrench set to 23 foot-pounds, which is 32 Newton meters. You pull and hold and keep the tension on and tighten up the 3 screws on the variators, on both variators, which preloads the variators to their set. this side comes out, and on the driver's side you only tension from the intake, and then on the passenger side you tension from the exhaust. Tool goes in. You lock it in. I locked it in as far forward as I could because, as you can see, there's not much room between here and the body of the vehicle. The workshop manual does tell you to undo the engine mounts and jack the engine up if you're doing it in the car. I found that I moved it far enough and kept the pressure on just at this point, but that might not be the norm for all car engines. So all the timing gear is set. Base valve timing is set. Tension on the variators is set. So the next job is to put the crank pulley bolt in the end of the crank, rotate the engine over 2 rotations and recheck the timing. However, before that I have to remove the cam locks from the back of each cylinder head. 1, 2, and remove the crank locking tool from the flywheel and from the reluctor wheel. So that's going to take me a few minutes to do. I'll sort that out and rotate the engine over twice and recheck my timing. Okay, so all the timing is all set up, and I have taken the crank locks out and the cam locks are out at this time. We're going to rotate the crankshaft 2 turns for 1 turn of the cam and recheck the timing, and we should be close to putting back in the cam locks and being all set. So here we go, 2 turns. There's 1. Should be coming up on 2. Okay, so we're putting the engine back together. The timing has all been set. I did actually get it off by a fraction, so I had to reset it again. I found that actually putting the cam locks back in, they come with these wing nuts, but because the bulkhead here on the firewall interferes with the wing nut, I actually used a 8/125 bolt, about 2.5 inches long, and it does the same job. Everything's all perfectly timed up now using these cam locks, but like I say, it's a tight fit on this driver's side, so I put a bolt in. Works just as well. To continue on, we're going to put the front timing cover back into place. It has a neoprene seal on it, right the way around. And then we'll put the crank pulley back on, which has to be pressed back on using the tool that we used to remove it with. At that point, we're going to build up the front, put the valve covers back on, front covers back on, and put all the ancillaries back on. We'll be doing a step-by-step probably on refit on a few of the components. A lot of it is just reverse of removal, of course. And we'll be putting a new water pump back on the engine as well. So the tool is now bottomed out, the pulley's on as far as it can go, with me just swinging on the pulley, on the press tool. I'm going to remove the press tool from it now. Take off a bit of the strain. Remembering clockwise to unscrew. The whole assembly. And I am going to check with a mirror just to make sure it is fully home. And I can even see the key. I don't know whether you can see that there. The key all the way at the bottom at the 6 o'clock position. We still have the crank locked with the locking pin in the flywheel, which is going to stay there until I actually tighten up the front pulley bolt, which will add a bit of extra locking. We also have to put on the new hub lock for the front dampener. Put it to the opposite side as we did to undo, so we can actually swing on it. It takes 200 Newton meters of torque and then 3/4 of a turn. It is a stretch bolt. So we're reinstalling the front upper timing covers. They can be installed with the solenoids in. I'm going to put a thin bead of sealant around this surface here. I already put the driver's side on. They go on very easily, but you do have to make sure the mating surfaces are nice and clean and free from the old RTV sealant. I've scraped it all off, trying not to damage the mating surface. The sealant will take up a certain amount of scratches, but you can't gouge them, of course. After that, we're going to install the valve covers. I've already put on new seals, new gaskets, and the bolts back in to help locate the gasket and hold it in place while we try and reinstall it without losing the gasket. Nice thin bead of sealant. Okay, that's the front cam covers on. Next job is to put the valve covers on. Just a couple to hold it in place. I'll try and get just checking to make sure the half moon seal at the back on that valve cover is seated in its right place. So the harmonic dampener pulley, front crank pulley, is back installed. I pressed it on. I've remounted the dampener holding tool that just holds everything static while you torque tighten it. The torque setting initially is 200 Newton meters, and then a 3/4 turn, which is for the torque to yield stretch bolt. So now I pre-tightened it, but we can feel it. There's the 200 Newton meters. Remove the torque wrench. Then they want a 3/4 of a turn on the torque to yield bolt. I've fortunately already tightened it, but of course you need a good length breaker bar to get that leverage. It is quite tight at that point. Not that I needed 2 people, but I had an assistant help me. Just makes life a little easier. After that's done, all the holding tool can be removed, the lock pin out of the flywheel can be removed, and then I'm going to start on putting the rest of the motor back together, putting fuel injectors in, coils back in, reconnecting fuel lines, etc, etc. Radiator back in, of course, and then at the end I will reiterate and go over everything again. So where we left off was I was installing the harmonic dampener, the front crank pulley, on the engine. There's no real need to get into any detail of really installing all the components, because basic knowledge is that all the components go back on as they were removed. I mean, I'm sure most of the shops that are going to be continuing to do this sort of job know how to put a water pump on and replace a thermostat. So we focus mainly on the timing chain kit and the components that were associated to it. So when you're ready for a challenge at replacing this timing chain kit on the 5.0 engine, give us a call at 1-800-533-2210 and talk to one of our knowledgeable sales reps, and they will set you up pretty much with all the tooling and all the components that you'll need to do the job. Or you can visit our website at roverparts.com.